third time doing this video. The first time I did it all in one go, and then when it rendered into one photo. I don't know what I did wrong, but I lost it all. So then the second time I cleaned up the phone a bit, and I broke it into 2 or 3 chunks, and somewhere along the line it ran out of memory, so I couldn't even render. So this is the third time. I'm going to be doing them in probably 20 or 30 minute chunks, and I'll do one, I'll render it, and then upload it, ditch it, do the next, because I really want to get this one out there. This is Aristotle's Poetics, and what I'll do is I'll do a whole bunch of videos. You know, I wanted to do one as a viewer. I like the longer videos, but I can't do that. I don't have that capacity at the time. So I'll have to do a bunch of little ones, and then at some point I would like to do a review and template, just like we did with the Sun Tzu's Art of War, so that you could have a template for your storytelling as you go forward, something easy to look at, and I'll put that up onto my social media there. So Aristotle's Poetics is another treatise. It's about 2,500 years old, so I think maybe a bit more, so it might be a bit older than Sun Tzu's Art of War. It is in the public domain, just like Sun Tzu's Art of War. The one that I'll be reading from is amherst.edu whatever. It's on an iPad, so however they do their things, but you can just search for it, you'll find it. I'm new to Aristotle. I've only read it probably like 6 times now, 7 times, including the 2 read-throughs I did with, or tried to do with you, and what I'll do again. So I'm still studying it. I wrote it out once. I still got to break it down into jot notes and turn that into a poster, so it'll still be a little while, but I'm still learning it, and you know, I think it's a once a week character theme thing, so I got some time to put it together. We'll just be reading it through it here. Some of it's not completely translated, and in this version they just put in the Greek words, like literally for the letters, like literally they go like alpha, beta, gamma, iota, all that shit, and then you're just supposed to try to put the word together. So I'll try to do that for you. I'm, like I said, I'm new to this rabbit hole, so when I went down it one night, I heard that it's not complete. That part of it burned up in, I think it was like the Great Fire of Alexandria, and that part was more based on comedy. So I'll try to keep that in mind as we go along. Maybe something will pop up and we'll be like, oh, we could reverse engineer that into what Aristotle may have meant for comedy because of this and this, right? And what else? Oh, whenever you see a movie win a very prestigious award and you wonder what the fuck, right? There's maybe another movie that brought in so much more money and stuff. Whenever that happens and you're wondering what's going on, it's this. It's the Poetics of Aristotle. This is the reason why. He lays like a foundation for good and bad telling, and he considers comedy a lesser order of storytelling. So it's possible that there's never been a comedy that's won a very prestigious award. Like there's probably prestigious awards for comedy, but when everything's mixed together, I could be wrong, you know. I don't know that shit. I don't follow the awards ceremonies and stuff. Maybe you do. Maybe you can comment below and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's quite possible that due to this being the foundation on what all critics judge storytelling on, a comedy just could never get that best award. And you know, I noticed with myself, when you start studying storytelling and you learn how it's done, you become like a critic yourself, and things that you used to like, you might not like anymore, because they might just be spectacular and really sloppy. And some, you know, the machine thing that he talks about in this is kind of, you might recognize it in things. So yeah, I gotta try to keep these videos short, but I'll do the complete read through. I'll put it into a playlist, and you can just watch it read through. And what else? I think that's it. I think we can get started. There is 27 chapters, and unfortunately, when I'm reading, there is no title to the chapter. And I can read you the titles, and I will, but as we're going on, I'm not going to have that ability to flip back and forth. So well, I guess I would, but it's just not practical, right? Because I got to find my place back and forth, and you don't want to sit there and watch me lose my page, kind of thing, right? So I'll read you the titles. Maybe you can write them down and have them as you go along, if that's something you'd like. And yeah, so let's go. Aristotle's Poetics. Chapter 1 is Imitation, the common principle of the arts of poetry. Chapter 2, the objects of imitation. Chapter 3, the manner of imitation. Chapter 4, the origin and development of poetry. Chapter 5, the definition of the ludicrous and a brief sketch of the rise of comedy. Chapter 6, the definition of tragedy. Chapter 7, the plot must be a whole. Chapter 8, the plot must be a unity. Chapter 9, the plot continued, dramatic unity. Chapter 10, the plot continued, definitions of simple and complex plots. Chapter 11, plot continued, reversal of the situation, recognition, and tragic or disastrous incident defined and explained. Chapter 12, the quantitative parts of tragedy defined. Chapter 13, plot continued. What constitutes tragic action? Chapter 14, plot continued. The tragic emotions of pity and fear should spring out of the plot itself. Chapter 15, the element of character in tragedy. Chapter 16, plot continued. Recognition, its various kinds with examples. Oh, I'm also new, so I'm from the nonfiction world. I'm not very versed in some of the Greek poetry whatsoever, so I will probably butcher names, and I won't understand the references myself. Chapter 17, practical rules for the tragic poet. Chapter 18, further rules for the tragic poet. Chapter 19, thought or the intellectual element and diction in tragedy. Chapter 20, diction or language in general. 21, Poetic Diction. 22, Poetic Diction continued, how poetry combines elevation of language with perspicuity. Chapter 23, Epic Poetry. Chapter 24, Epic Poetry continued, how poetry, Chapter 24, Epic Poetry continued, further points of agreement with tragedy. Chapter 25, critical objections brought against poetry and the principles on which they are to be answered. Chapter 26, a general estimate of the 5 comparative worth of epic poetry and tragedy. So our translation, the one I'm reading, is by S.H. Butcher. So I should probably give, I should probably mention who's doing it. So if there's different ones, I don't know. Right? Aristotle's Poetics, Chapter 1. I propose to treat of poetry in itself and of its various kinds, noting the essential quality of each, to inquire into structure of the plot as a requisite to a good poem, into the number and nature of the parts of which the poem is composed, and similarly into whatever else falls within the same inquiry. Following then the order of nature, let us begin with the principles which come first. Epic poetry and tragedy, comedy also, and dithyrambic poetry and the music of the flute and of the lyre in most of their forms are all in their general conception modes of imitation. They differ, however, from one another in three respects: the medium, the objects, the manner or mode of imitation being each case distinct. For as there are persons who by conscious art or mere habits imitate and represent various objects through the medium of color and form, or again by the voice, so in the arts above mentioned, taken as a whole, the imitation is produced by rhythm, language, or harmony, either singly or combined. Thus, in the music of the flute and lyre, harmony and rhythm alone are employed. Also in other arts, such as that of the shepherd's pipe, which are essentially similar to these. In dancing, rhythm alone is used without harmony. For even dancing imitates character, emotion, and action by rhythmical movement. There is another art which imitates by means of language alone, and that either in prose or verse, which verse again may either combine different meters or consists of but one kind. Which verse again may either combine different meters or consist of but one kind. But this has hitherto been without a name. For there is no common term we could apply to the minds of Sophoron and Xenarchus, and the Socratic dialogue on the one hand, and on the other to poetic imitations in iambic, elegiac, or any similar meter. People do indeed add the word maker or poet to their name of the meter, and speak of elegiac poets or epic, that is hexameter poets, as if it were not the imitation that makes the poet, but the verse that entitles them all indiscriminately to the name. Even when a treatise on medicine or natural science is brought out in verse, the name of the poet is by custom given to the author. And yet Homer and Empedocles have nothing in common but the meter, so that it would be all right to call the one the poet, the other physicist rather than poet. On the same principle, even if they had a physicist 2,500 years ago, I guess, mathematician or something, right? On the same principle, even if a writer in his poetic imitation were to combine all meters, as Sherman did in his Centaur, which is a medley composed of meters of all kinds, we should bring him too under the general term poet. So much then for these distinctions. There are again some arts which employ all the means above mentioned, namely rhythm, tune, and meter. Such are the dithyrambic and gnomic poetry, and also tragedy and comedy, But between them, the difference is that in the first two cases, these means are all employed in combination. In the latter, now one means is employed, now another. Such then are the differences of the arts with respect to the medium of imitation. Chapter 2. Since the objects of imitation are men in action, and these men must either be of higher or lower type, for moral character mainly answers to these divisions, goodness and badness being the distinguishing marks of moral differences. It follows that we must represent men as either better than in real life, or as worse, or as they are. It is the same in painting. Polygnotus depicted men as nobler than they are, Panson as less noble. Dionysius drew them true to life. Now it is evident that each of these modes of imitation above mentioned will exhibit these differences and become a distinct kind in imitating objects that are thus distinct. Such diversities may be found even in dancing, flute playing, and lyre playing. So again in language, whether prose or verse unaccompanied by music. Homer, for example, makes men better than they are, Cleophon as they are, Hegemon and the Thasian, the inventor of parodies, and Nicomedes, the author of the Deliad, worse than they are. The same thing holds good of dithyrambs and gnomes. Here too one may portray different types, as Timotheus, Philoxenus differed in representing their cyclopses. The same distinction marks off tragedy from comedy, for comedy aims at representing men as worse, tragedy as better than actual life. That's probably important to remember if you're going to try to reverse engineer sort of what the missing text would be, is that comedy aims to represent men worse than they are, right? People worse. Chapter 3. There is still a difference, the manner in which each of these objects may be imitated. For the medium being the same and the objects the same, the poet may imitate by narration, in which case he can either take another personality as Homer does, or speak in his own person, unchanged, or he may present all his characters as living and moving before us. These then, as we said at the beginning, are the three differences which distinguish artistic imitation: the medium, the objects, and the manner. So that from one point of view, Sophocles is an imitator of the same kind as Homer, for both imitate higher types of character. From another point of view, of the same kind as Aristophanes, for both imitate persons acting and doing. Hence, some say the name of drama is given to such poems as representing action. For the same reason, the Dorians claim the invention of both tragedy and comedy. The claim to comedy is put forward by the Megarians, not only those of Greece proper, who allege that it originated under their democracy, but also by the Megarians of Sicily. For the poet Epicharmus, who is much earlier than Chionides and Magnus, belonged to that country. Tragedy too is claimed by certain Dorians of the Peloponnese. In each case they appealed to the evidence of language. The outlying villages, they say, are by them called Komai by the Athenians, Demai, and they assumed that the comedians were so named not from Comezei to reveal, because they wandered from village to village. Kota Comas. That being excluded contemptuously from the city, they add also that the Dorian word for doing is drone, and the Athenian pratai. This may suffice as to the number and nature of the various modes of imitation. Alright, I think that's about the first go, I think.